In the heart of Metropolis, where gleaming skyscrapers pierce the clouds and the hum of ambition never sleeps, one man has always believed he should stand above them all. Not as a hero, not as a savior, but as the inevitable ruler of humanity. His name is whispered with fear, respect, and loathing. Lex Luthor, the man who dares to look Superman in the eyes and see an obstacle, not a miracle. Before he became the world's most infamous criminal genius, Alexander Joseph Luthor was a boy born into a city that worshipped power. In most origins, his life began in the rougher corners of Metropolis, often under the shadow of neglectful or abusive parents. Other tellings place him as the son of Lionel Luthor, a ruthless businessman whose empire was built on manipulation and exploitation. No matter the version, one thing remains constant. Lex was taught early that trust was a weakness and control was the only path to survival. Lex's mind was his weapon from the start. As a child, he dismantled radios, rewired machinery, and solved complex equations long before his peers could even grasp them. But where others saw a gifted prodigy, Lex saw opportunity. He understood that intelligence wasn't just about knowing, it was about owning. Owning the knowledge, owning the resources, and eventually, owning the people who depended on them. In some interpretations, tragedy would strike early. A fatal accident, sometimes orchestrated, sometimes purely cruel fate, took his parents' lives, leaving Lex to inherit their modest fortune. Rather than crumble, he flourished, using his newfound independence to study science, engineering, and business with relentless obsession. In other tellings, Lionel's influence shaped him into a colder, more calculated version of himself, one who saw morality as an inconvenience. But the true pivot point of his life wasn't a death, a fortune, or even his rise in Metropolis's corporate ladder. It was the arrival of an alien in a red cape. The day Superman appeared, saving lives, stopping disasters, and capturing the love of the people. Lex felt something he'd rarely experienced before: outrage. This alien, this godlike being, had not earned humanity's trust, and yet they worshipped him without question. In Lex's eyes, Superman wasn't a savior. He was a threat, a crutch that would make humanity dependent and weak. And Lex Luthor would never allow mankind's destiny to be handed over to an outsider. From that moment, every ounce of Lex's brilliance turned toward a single goal: proving that Superman was unworthy of humanity's devotion. Sometimes, this meant elaborate scientific traps, powered armor, or weapons capable of channeling kryptonite's lethal radiation. Other times, it meant orchestrating political manipulation, media propaganda, and even alliances with villains, far less intelligent but equally ruthless. But Lex's genius wasn't confined to destruction. He built LexCorp, transforming it into one of the most powerful corporations in the world. Publicly, LexCorp was a symbol of progress, creating jobs, funding research, and bringing cutting-edge technology to the masses. Privately, it was his war chest, fueling his battles against Superman and ensuring he always had influence over governments, markets, and even the underworld. In the comics, Lex's appearances range from a mad scientist in the Golden Age, donning bizarre inventions and wild plans, to the polished, billionaire industrialist of the modern era, a man whose public persona is untouchable. In films like Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, Lex takes on a more erratic, almost theatrical brilliance, manipulating events from behind the curtain to pit gods and men against each other. In animated series such as Justice League, he is cold, calculated, and terrifyingly patient, often working with or against other villains when it suits his long-term plans. And yet, for all his crimes, Lex Luthor sees himself as the hero of his own story. He doesn't believe he's evil. To him, Superman is the invader, and Lex is the last line of defense for human independence. It's this conviction, this unshakable belief in his own righteousness, that makes him one of the most dangerous minds in the DC universe. In the shimmering skyline of Metropolis, the name LexCorp became synonymous with innovation, wealth, and influence. Luthor's empire expanded beyond weapons research, reaching into biotechnology, advanced robotics, and energy systems that promised to change the world. Every breakthrough was presented as a gift to humanity. But behind the corporate sheen, Lex's innovations often served a double purpose: public utility and private leverage. In the comics, the 1980s era solidified Lex's dominance. Lex used his resources to buy politicians, bury competitors, and quietly acquire alien technology through black market channels. On the surface, he was a philanthropist, funding schools, hospitals, and urban renewal projects. But those who dared to look deeper saw the other side, a ruthless corporate shark who would dismantle a rival's life for daring to outbid him. Then came the moment that would define him forever. Superman arrived on in the films and comics. Superman's public debut was both awe-inspiring and infuriating for Luthor. Here was a man who could fly, bend steel, and survive explosions, someone adored by the public without earning it through business deals or human ingenuity. To Lex, Superman was an insult to the human spirit, a living reminder that no matter how hard a man worked, an alien could outshine him simply by existing. Luthor's obsession grew quickly. He didn't just want to defeat Superman, he wanted to prove to the world that this so-called savior was a fraud. And more importantly, he wanted to demonstrate that humanity, under his leadership, could surpass even a god. Lex's war against Superman was never just about throwing punches. It was a chess game played on every front: legal, political, technological, and psychological. He manipulated the media to question Superman's motives, pushed laws that restricted alien involvement in human affairs, and engineered crises that would force Superman into morally compromising situations. In the 2006 film Superman Returns, Lex's schemes involved massive real estate gambits and alien tech exploitation. In the Rebirth and New 52 comic arcs, he evolved further, becoming not only Metropolis' most powerful man, but, at times, a public ally to Superman, wearing his own powered armor to protect the city while undermining him at every turn. One of Luthor's most iconic innovations was his warsuit, a towering green and purple powered armor loaded with kryptonite weaponry, advanced shielding, and energy cannons capable of harming Superman. In both the comics and animated series, the warsuit became a symbol. Lex didn't just compete in boardrooms, he was willing to meet his rival on the battlefield. This armor represented the culmination of his belief: if humanity was to survive in a world of gods, it needed champions forged by intellect and will, not alien biology. And in his mind, no champion was greater than Lex Luthor himself. Despite his open confrontations with Superman, Lex knew when to step back and wear the mask of the respectable billionaire. He funded art galleries, rebuilt neighborhoods after alien invasions, and positioned himself as the man who would protect Metropolis when Superman inevitably failed. In certain storylines, such as Forever Evil, Lex even became a temporary hero, leading the Justice League against greater threats. But whether savior or villain, his end goal remained the same: Lex Luthor must be the one in control. By the end of this chapter in his life, Lex Luthor was no longer just a businessman. He was a symbol of human defiance, a man who would challenge the most powerful being on Earth, not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. In his own words, "No man in this world should be worshipped as a god, not even me." But deep inside, he knew that someday it would be. Power had always been Lex Luthor's drug, but now he was addicted beyond redemption. After years of clandestine maneuvers, corporate takeovers, and underground dealings, LexCorp stood as an empire not just of industry, but of influence. Governments, militaries, scientific institutions all had tasted Luthor's generosity, and all owed him favors. Yet in Lex's mind, these were mere stepping stones. His true mission remained the same: to rid the world of Superman, the alien interloper who dared stand in the way of human destiny. Lex began to escalate his strategies. No longer content with public relations wars and political manipulation, he turned to science as his ultimate weapon. He poured unlimited resources into research labs, hiring the brightest minds on Earth. And when intellect alone was insufficient, he didn't hesitate to dabble in ethically forbidden experiments. Kryptonite became his obsession, not just as a weapon, but as a tool to understand and ultimately surpass Kryptonian biology. Lex envisioned himself as more than a man. He would become the pinnacle of human evolution, capable of standing toe with a god. The public began to see another side of Luthor. To the masses, he was still the philanthropist, funding hospitals, schools, and space exploration. But to those who worked in his shadow, Lex was a tyrant of precision, a perfectionist, whose temper was as deadly as his intellect. His inner circle knew the truth. Lex did not serve humanity out of love, he served his vision of humanity, one where he alone dictated the terms of progress. Superman's continued heroics only fueled his resentment. Every time the Man of Steel foiled a disaster, every time he saved lives or inspired hope, Lex saw weakness being celebrated. In his mind, humanity's dependence on an alien savior was a disease, and he was the cure. The irony, of course, was that in his quest to free mankind, Lex was willing to strip it of its freedom entirely. In this period, Luthor orchestrated some of his most infamous plots. He brokered alliances with other villains, each deal carefully structured so that he remained in control. He manipulated world crises, sometimes engineering them from the shadows, only to emerge as the hero who could fix them, all while subtly undermining Superman's reputation. In boardrooms and war rooms alike, Lex's voice carried weight equal to that of President Dot. Then came the moment that nearly tipped the balance in his favor. Through an unprecedented fusion of Kryptonian technology and his own engineering genius, Lex developed the Warsuit, a towering suit of green and purple armor designed to match Superman's strength blow for blow. No longer limited to schemes and proxies, Lex could now take the fight directly to his nemesis. Their battles became legend, shaking cities and testing the limits of both men's endurance. To Lex, these confrontations were not just fights, they were philosophical duels, proof that human will could rival alien might. But victory eluded him. Each defeat was another wound to his pride, another reminder that even his genius had limits. And so, Lex went further. He began exploring, not just science, but the fringes of the arcane, seeking power in realms beyond human understanding. Magic, alien alliances, alternate dimensions. Nothing was too dangerous if it could tilt the scales. Yet in his pursuit, a dangerous truth began to surface. The more Luthor sought to destroy Superman, the more his own humanity eroded. He was no longer simply a man with a cause. He was becoming a force of nature, relentless, unstoppable, and utterly convinced that the end justified any means. The world saw Superman as the ultimate symbol of power, but in the dark corridors of LexCorp, whispers grew that Lex Luthor might be the greater threat. His war was no longer about one man against another. It was about the very definition of what it meant to be human, and whether that humanity could survive in a world where Lex Luthor's vision came to pass. The world watched as Metropolis stood on the brink. Towers of steel and glass reflected the fires of chaos, and above it all, Lex Luthor stood in the eye of the storm not as a victim, but as its architect. His empire was no longer confined to boardrooms and laboratories. It now spanned armies of machines, private military forces, and a network of influence reaching into the highest halls of global power. Every word he spoke was calculated, every move a step in a grand design only he could see. The rivalry with Superman had escalated beyond battles of fists or technology. It had become a war of ideals. Luthor's belief in humanity's unshackled potential versus Superman's vision of hope and unity. Lex painted himself as humanity's last defense against alien dependence, convincing nations and leaders that Earth's destiny must remain in human hands, no matter the cost. To some, he was a savior, to others, a tyrant, and to himself, he was the only one who truly understood what was at stake. But genius often breeds arrogance, and arrogance breeds downfall. Time and again, Superman unraveled his schemes, sometimes with sheer force, sometimes with quiet compassion that Luthor could never comprehend. Yet even in defeat, Lex refused to yield. Every loss was just another calculation, another step toward the next confrontation. For Luthor, persistence was victory in itself. He would never stop, never surrender, never admit that the man he sought to destroy might not be his enemy, but the mirror, reflecting what he could have been if his brilliance had been tempered by empathy. Still, Luthor's reach extended far beyond Metropolis. From global markets to alien tech black markets, from covert experiments to political manipulation, his influence shaped the world in ways unseen. Even when imprisoned, his intellect remained a weapon sharper than any blade, and his network loyalists, mercenaries, and rival powers kept his presence alive. The walls of a cell could not contain the mind of Lex Luthor. As the years passed, the battles with Superman became legends, told in whispers and headlines alike. Yet for Lex, they were not stories, they were proof that he could stand against a god and still matter. In his eyes, he was not a villain, but a visionary, not a criminal, but a necessary counterweight to unchecked power. Whether history would remember him as a hero or a monster was irrelevant to him. What mattered was that his name would never be forgotten. And so, somewhere in the shadows of Metropolis, a man in an impeccably tailored suit studies the horizon. He knows Superman will always be out there, soaring above the city. He knows their war will never truly end, and deep down, he welcomes it because, for Lex Luthor, the struggle is the point. To challenge the impossible, to outwit the unstoppable, to prove, again and again, that a mortal man can stand toe-to-toe with a god. Lex Luthor's legacy is not in the empires he built or the machines he unleashed. It is in the defiance that burns in his eyes, in the unyielding belief that the fate of Earth should belong to humans alone. And as long as Superman draws breath, Lex will be there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again.